Hello, my name is Madeline and welcome back to my channel, Cozy Cottage Chapters. Today I have a very fun list of classic books to share with you. Within the past 3 or so years, I've really become interested in reading classics. It was not something I really did before, outside of what is required to read in school. But I had this desire and I heard so many people on BookTube and Bookstagram talking about classic books, and I just really wanted to see what I was missing out on. So I dove headfirst into classics and I maybe made some interesting choices in the books that I chose to start out with. Some of them ended up being great. Some of them I had a bit more of a hard time getting through. And so that's why I assembled a bit of a list for you. And I have some books that I think are good entry points for people who are wanting to read more classic literature. Of course, kind of the term classics is vague because there are lots of different genres within that. You have mysteries and you have adventure novels and you have romance and all of these different things. So when people talk about classics, they're really not talking about one specific genre, which I think can be a little misleading. There is something for everyone, I think. Whatever your interests are, I think you can find a classic book that would be exciting. Anyways, I tried to pull books from a variety of genres and books that I read recently and accessible to someone who maybe hasn't read a lot of classic literature before. I'll stop rambling about all of that. Let's get into the books. So the first book I have to share with you is actually the only book I don't physically have a copy of, but I read it earlier this year and absolutely adored it, and that is The Scarlet Pimpernel by Baroness Orcaczy. I think that's how you say that. This is a really fun adventure story. We follow this masked hero, the Scarlet Pimpernel. Nobody knows who he is, but he rescues French aristocracy from the guillotine. This is all happening during the Reign of Terror in France, and he shepherds them safely to England. Obviously, he's pretty hated in France for doing this, and people are out to get him, but nobody knows who he is, so it's this big mystery. There's some romance in this too that is really well developed quite slowly throughout the novel. And at the end, I was just turning pages so fast, wanting to figure out how things were going to turn out. This kept me at the edge of my seat, and I really, really enjoyed this book. It's definitely underrated and something I would really highly recommend. Next up, I have something totally different, and this is a children's classic. I think children's classics are a great place to start with classic literature because you get some of that more old-fashioned style language, but in a more accessible and digestible format for a modern reader who is maybe not used to that. Not discount children's classics at all. They are excellent starting points and can be books that are really enjoyed by any age. So one I have to recommend is Heidi by Joanna Spyri. I read this summer and fell in love. I think everyone kind of knows the story of Heidi. It's a young girl who is sent to live with her grandfather in the Swiss Alps, and there's just beautiful descriptions of nature. She eventually has to go off to the city and befriend this young girl, and there's just a really lovely friendship that evolves out of that. This was such a beautiful, lovely, sweet read with some really deep, profound lessons and reflections on faith throughout. So I think this could be something that is enjoyed by any age. These books are in no particular order, which I'm sure you have figured out. So it's kind of just a hodgepodge of things. But next up, I have a Jane Austen book to recommend. Now, I haven't read all of Jane Austen's work yet, but out of what I've read, this is, I think, the best starting point, and it's not the one that typically people hear about and want to read first, which is Pride and Prejudice, but I think a good starting point with Jane Austen is Emma. This follows our main character, Emma, who lives with her father, and she is a bit of a matchmaker. She's trying to set her friend up with someone, and things don't always work out with Emma's matchmaking endeavors, we can say. But what I really love about this, Emma is not a perfect heroine at all. She makes lots of mistakes. She yeah, she makes lots of mistakes. But at the same time, we see so much growth in her, and we also see that she is flawed, but she still loves very deeply, and she still cares about people very much, even though she makes mistakes and does things wrong, which I think makes her such a lovely character to read about because she feels very real. And she's not cookie cutter, perfect kind of a character. This book is a little bit controversial. Some people love it, some people hate it. I really enjoy it. Like I said, I think Emma is complex, and people sometimes write her off as just being annoying and a matchmaker and, you know, not really interested in people's well-being. But I think she does. She does care deeply about the people she loves, and she makes mistakes, but we all do. I have a soft spot in my heart for Emma. Next up is another author that I really enjoy. I have not read all of her books yet, but I would really like to because I've enjoyed what I've read so far. And that is Willa Cather's Death Comes for the Archbishop. This takes place in the American Southwest, in Colorado, New Mexico, I think parts of Texas, maybe as well in Arizona. I don't know. It kind of travels around. We follow these two priests, French priests, who get sent to America to be missionaries in the Southwest, and we are following them as they try to set things up in this very remote kind of a place. The descriptions of nature are so beautiful and so interesting and really make you feel transported to this time and place. Each chapter is kind of a different story from their lives and their adventures, which is really fun and I think makes this move really quickly because you're getting these different glimpses at their life. I just really enjoyed this book, and it's definitely one that I would like to reread. I feel like there's a theme of some of my favorite authors showing up in these books, and this is another one who I really enjoy. But this is not maybe a typical starting point for this author, but there are a few reasons why I chose this book, and that is Alexandre Dumas' The Black Tulip. Dumas is famous for The Count of Monte Cristo, The Three Musketeers, and this is kind of one of the lesser known books of his, but one of the reasons I picked it is because it is significantly shorter than some of his tomes. And I think this gives you a good taste of what Dumas' writing is like and what his stories contain. It is less developed and less good, I think, than some of his other books. But anyways, it gives you an entry point and it'll only go up from there. Set in Holland, and he is obsessed with growing a black tulip and being the first person to be able to do this. So much so to the point where it drives him a little bit mad, and there's stealing, there's revenge, there's so many wild things that take place all because of this black tulip. And it seems almost a little bit ridiculous when explaining it, like people are committing crimes and doing terrible things to get this tulip, but it's also such an interesting story, and I was just so engrossed in it and could not put it down. I had to know what happened. So there's also a lot of history in his stories, so I feel like I'm learning a lot about time periods that I don't know much about, which is also very interesting. And if you're interested in historical kind of fiction, maybe Dumas is a good choice for you. Alright, it is October at the time of filming this, so if you're looking for a spooky kind of read, of course I have to go with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is another one that I feel like everyone kind of knows something about, but the Hollywood Frankenstein is not the Frankenstein that Mary Shelley wrote. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is much more interesting, much more philosophical and deep. I don't want to say too much because I feel like you should go in and discover it for yourself. But I will say this book has some really interesting reflections and passages that I am still thinking about more than a year later after reading this. It wasn't my favorite book of all time, but it is one that I'm still thinking about. That's something to say about it. So many passages that I underlined, and I would definitely like to come back to this at some point. because I think I might enjoy it more on a reread. Finally, I have what I would probably consider my favorite book of all time. Of course, it's like basically impossible to choose a book, but this is the book that I always say. That is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I adore this book. I read it for the first time when I was young. I've reread it many times as an adult, and every time I read it, I come away with something different. A different character that I appreciate more, a different lesson, and I think that's the mark of a good book, and especially classic books, is that you can read and reread them. Each time you take something different away and it affects you in a different way. And yeah, this is the story of 4 sisters. Each sister is very different, and we're following them as they're growing up and maturing. There are some lessons to be learned. There are some funny moments and some sad moments. This is such a beautiful, beautiful portrait of a family and sisters, and yeah, I can't say enough lovely things about Little Women, and I just completely adore this book. All right, there you have it. There is my list of some classic books that I think are good entry points for someone who wants to read more classics, or even maybe if you just haven't read these books before. I think they are lovely, lovely things to pick up. And I hope you found something that you would like to read soon. Let me know below if you have any classic books that you would recommend, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!